And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here, where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. I'm your host, Charles McKeever, and today it's cold. It's cold here in Texas. I have no idea. What's that? Oh, it's especially my face. Yeah, especially my face. The badger is dead, which is the way that it was described at this morning's team meeting. So,
Animal control finally came and got there for you?
They did. They did. It was a little bit of a Springer moment. It didn't want to go, but we worked it out. So if you are joining us for the first time, thank you very much for watching and for tuning in. Last week we talked about a bunch of things, but we'll get to that in just a moment. I want to welcome the panel that we've got here. We've got Dr. Brian Burton down in Abilene. Thank you for joining us. As I said, it's cold here, so anybody who can join us is a welcome guest. Speaking of cold, is it cold in Portland?
No, it's sunny for once.
Is it really?
We got a high-pressure system that's giving us clear skies, blue skies. It's beautiful.
So that's Ed Maurina joining us from roaminggamer.com as always, and thank you, Ed, for being here. And then we've got a special guest here on the panel, and Tony Godfrey.
That's right, Godfrey.
Godfrey, man, that's one of my favorite characters, Godfrey, and he's at Shark Apps LLC. So
that's right.
So thanks for being here, Tony. I know you're in the forums a lot, and you comment a lot on the videos and stuff like that. So
yes, I try to help out however I can.
Which I wanted to mention. You said you watched the show several times, often as a matter of fact, and you just wanted to join the panel. So
yeah.
It's an open invitation to anybody who's out there who watches, who has questions, who just wants to come and hang out. I mean, it's a hangout, and it's always open. It's always live. I mean, we record them and publish them just so that people can see them if they can't make it. But if you want to join, there's always space available. So come have a seat. All right, well, let's talk about what we talked about last week briefly. It was on show 130, and we talked about, we started a new series on game development. And if you haven't had a chance to go check that out, go over to youtube.com/Corona Geek. That's Hangout number 130. And we talked all about creating a new app, a new game. It's going to be an endless runner game. We broke down the different elements, maybe talked about some of the rules and stuff, and essentially what we're going to do is we're going to put this thing together in Corona and walk through the process of kind of examining the existing app that already is out there, and then putting the project together, organizing it, and getting down into some code and creating a finished app. So if you hadn't had a chance to go watch 129, go do that. This is actually 130. We're on 130 right now. Go watch 129. It's a good show. Also, we talked about transition library. Ed led us in that conversation, and we talked about some of the convenience methods that are available in transition. We talked about using transition.to and .from to move things around. Ed also demoed a transition library sampler that he put together, so you can just sort of, as Ed always does, makes things simple to be able to play with the settings and see what the end results are. And then we kind of left off with a peek at a transition easing sampler that I think that we're going to pick up on the conversation today, and Ed's going to walk us through that. And then again today we'll pick up the rest of the conversation on the game design series. So it's a lot of stuff, a lot of great stuff is happening here. So if you have any questions or whatever, you can always post them in the forums. We have a Corona Geek forum where you can go, and on any of the shows you can leave your comments, you can discuss the topic, even before or after the show. You can do that there. Also, show topics. You can provide us with show topics there as well. Just go to the forums. If you go to the show notes for this particular Hangout, we have a link to the forums where you can go and leave your suggestions. The newest suggestion was actually for consulting, development consulting. There was a suggestion. Well, Tony, was that you? Did you bring that up?
No, someone else did, but I thought that was an awesome suggestion because, just in addition to developing apps, I think it's a great way to get some income. So I know Ed's done a ton of this, so I would love to hear about some of those experiences as well.
You want to hear all my horror stories?
Definitely.
I mean, my war stories?
Yeah, I think we definitely should do that because I know that everybody, at least here that's on this panel, has experience with consulting and developing apps. And I think it would be a good topic to cover, especially if some of the process flow kind of stuff. How do you find clients and how do you handle clients, but also just sort of maybe how do you balance your time so that you can still do your own personal development projects, because I know that's one of the things that we struggle with. I know I do on a personal level, is trying to make sure that I'm leaving enough time for my own work and not just focusing solely on consulting work. So anyway, that was a great suggestion, and if you have suggestions as well, then go over and click on the link in the show notes, go to the forums, and leave your suggestions. We need them. One last note here, or one other note here. Mike over at Crave Creative is running a sale on Corona Widget Themes. Now, we've talked about this several times in the past. If you go over to cravecreative.com and click on the Developer Resources tab, we've said that there are a selection of widget themes there. Now, what you need to know is that you get the themes, you get the images, you get the source files, so you can look at this stuff if you want to figure out how he's done it, kind of get an idea of how you could do it yourself, or if you just want to kind of grab the stuff and go and you don't really want to mess with creating your own themes, he's got some great options over there. So right now he's running a sale, $5 off. You can save if you go over to Crave Creative right now and make a purchase. And Crossy Road. How you guys doing on Crossy Road? Is anybody high score champions here?
I posted something on your Facebook. Well,
Yeah?
I got over 330 something, and I don't think I'll ever do that again.
And how long did that take you? I mean,
I don't really know. I don't know how I got that far, honestly.
it's like
You keep tapping, and next thing you know, you get run over by a truck.
It's like a casino. There's no windows, no clocks. You lose all sense of time, and
That sounds like life. And before
Right.
you know it, you get run over by a truck. That pretty much describes it right there.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a lot of fun. That game's a lot of fun. If you guys haven't seen it yet, go check out Crossy Road. I think .com maybe is the website. But anyway, we'll have a link in the show notes to go and download it either on iOS or Android. And lots of fun. Tons of fun. I mean, it's the Frogger style, old school kind of thing with a little bit of a twist to it. I enjoy it a lot. I like playing. My daughter loves playing it. She's unlocked pretty much all the characters. But yeah, a lot of fun. Go check it out. This is the last week to play and post your high score over at facebook.com/Corona Geek for the chance to win a $50 gift card. So if you haven't played yet, you definitely need to. Tony's just told us, kind of what the benchmark is, and you can go out there and see what the other high scores are as well if you want to see what you need to come up with in order to compete. But we will announce the high score winner next Monday, March 2nd, and then we will announce the next game that we'll play for March. So get out there and start playing. Okay, I think that's it. I want to leave enough time for today's topics. Ed, do you want to pick up with transition easing, or what do you want to do?
I'm busy trying to beat the high score on Crossy Road.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Actually, what I'd like to do, one thing I wanted to add what you said earlier to people giving feedback is, as people are listening to us talking about like the transition library, or more specifically about this game, if they would like us to change the way we talk about it, spend more time on certain details, we need to hear about that as soon as possible so that I can go back and properly address things, because we're going to move fairly quickly through this game once we get past the planning stages, because it is a relatively simple game to create. And I always say stuff like that, and I think the guy who made the original game's like, yeah, well, it wasn't simple for me. It's simple for us because we get to stand on their shoulders in a sense and just reproduce what they did, not coming up with the original mechanics.
It's a good point. Yeah, definitely a good point. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we record these shows, is people can go back and watch them as many times as they need. So we can move fairly quickly. We know we have a smart audience, and they don't need to be talked to too slowly. But we do want to cover the concepts in a way that makes sense to them. So definitely, if you have feedback on that, leave it in the comments. Let us know, and Ed and I will make adjustments as we need to make sure that everybody is coming along the way they need to.
So the second part of my answer to your question is, you asked me how I want to approach this. Actually, I would like to talk about the clone game first and finish off with the transition library.
Sounds good.
Since I prepped in that order today.
Okay.
My brain is working in that order.
Before you start, I do want to point out to everybody that you got the GitHub repo there. And maybe you're going to cover this in just a moment. I don't know, but the code is available. So check the show notes for the links to download or get all this code.
Yes, actually, that was the very first thing I was going to say. Before we start, everybody who is following along and wants to I'm waving at the camera like you can see me. Everybody who is following along and wants to see how we make this, they need to go to my GitHub repository, Roman Gamer, and then go to the Corona Geek sub-repository. And below this, you're going to find a folder called Hangouts. And within Hangouts, we'll give you the direct link in the show. There's a folder called I Can Make That, and it's under here that all the different games that we will make over time will live. And so currently, the only game that's under here is Zigzag Boom Clone. And when you finally get to this level, be it from the direct link or crawling through the repository, you'll find a README, which gives some links to get the game to download it so you can play it, some videos so you can watch it, and then a discussion of what you're going to find in these different folders. So let me go ahead and close this up. Sorry, I have a multiple desktop set up here. There's my wife sneezing in the background again. I'm gonna have to close my door. All right, so the game that we're remaking is an endless runner style game in the sense that the level just continues forever and ever, and your player is moving through the level. It's not actually running, but it's close enough to call it an endless runner. Within this game, our goal is to get our player, which is basically a dot that is emitting particles, to move left and right through a hallway, which just zigzags over time. It either zags to the left or zags to the right. Your player moves at a 45-degree angle left or a 45-degree angle right. And the way we achieve this is through touching the screen. So it's a one-touch game. Touching the screen changes your movement from the right to the left or left to right. And your whole goal is to not run into the wall. And so every time you pass a corner, you get another point. And the more corners you pass, the higher your score. Pretty straightforward. So
it sounds simple.
It sounds simple, but
it's very hard.
There are, besides the playing part, implementation in this game, I'm going to give you a hint. The hardest thing to do in this game is to make the path. You would think that the path would be like pretty straightforward, but unless you have a background in 2D math, you'll soon discover that making a path that goes at a 45-degree angle and zigzags back and forth and getting the walls to connect to each other and setting up the collision it's not a huge feat, but without the background it becomes somewhat intractable. So next week we will dive into how to make the path. But this week I just want to give an overview of how the project is going to be organized so people can follow along. So I've already shown you the layout of the folders, but within here we have one called App, and I've decided that within App, every time I make a new version of the game, I'll create a new subfolder that has that version. So this lets people follow along and they get to see the mistakes that I've made as I go along. They can compare the two versions to see what the differences in the code are. And it just gives them the ability, if they wish, to walk through the entire video series that we'll produce and look at the exact code that we're talking about at the time. So I use kind of a strange naming convention. Most people find it strange. What it is, first is ZZBC, which is just Zigzag Boom Clone, underbar. And it may be a little bit hard to read on my screen because I can't make this very large. But then I end the the folder name with the format is year, month, day. And the reason I do this is because I'm one of those computer geek kind of guys who wants my files to be sorted for me in an increasing order, or a what's the word I'm looking for here?
Ascending?
Ascending, there we go, in an ascending order. And so I know that year, month, day will always ascend. It'll always be organized correctly. People who use day, month, year, that always confuses the heck out of me. I can't figure out what came first because, 090909, what are we? Okay, that one was pretty clear, but 0908 07, I'm confused. 2007, 2009, 2008, September, August, what's going on here? So it's going to be ZZBC _ something, and it'll always be 15 because I think we'll get this done in 2015. The month and the day. So the folder we're working with today is 150223, 23rd of February. So within here, the important part is the way I lay out my projects is the first thing I try to do is minimize the number of folders that are going to be in the root folder. And the root folder is basically the folder where the main.lua file is. I limit this to contain the main.lua file, the config.lua file, build settings, any fonts that I'm using, and then eventually some icons for the app when we upload it to the App Store. After that, everything lives in folders. My common folders are an images folder, a scripts folder, and a sounds folder. And then for 99.9% of my projects, you will also see SSK, which is my starter kit, the Super Starter Kit, which is a huge collection of helper bits and pieces that I've written. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour of main.lua, and then I'm going to explain a critical feature of how this game is laid out, and then we'll go and move on to the transitions. The one thing I like to do with main.lua is I like to keep it super short. So mine's basically about 70 lines long, and as we proceed, it's not going to get much longer than that. If it gets over 100 lines, I'll be surprised. And most of this is going to be comments. Functional code, we're probably talking about 20, 25 lines of code. The reason I do that, well, I just don't like to put important code in the main Lua file. You sometimes see people make projects where the whole game or the whole application is written in main and maybe like one other file. And that may work, but over time you're going to find that it's very hard to maintain. You're not going to be able to take that project later and use it for something else, repurpose it. So I set my games up and my apps up so that I can repurpose them quickly. I can take a game, because I don't know if you're like me, but I will work on a game and I'll get partway through it and I'll say, this game is fun, but what if I tweaked this mechanic? Well, now you're stuck. You can either create two versions within the same game where you've got two different mechanics and you've got to select them somehow, or you can make a copy of your game, set it aside, make that little tweak, and then go back and work on your original game. And pretty soon you've got several games that came out of the one and you've repurposed it over and over. So even as I was working on this example, I started thinking, wow, what if we changed the hallway and made it turn on its side? That'd be interesting. Oh no, we have to do the original clone. So I may be repurposing this myself later. Anyways, the organization of main Lua, what you're going to see in here is I put in my case error detect code. We talked about this a few shows back. This is a helper script. What it does, it will detect if we typo file names. For example, if we try to load a image file and it's Big Bob all lowercase, and then I put Big Bob with capital B, that'll work great in the simulator, but when you get to the device, it will fail. So having these two lines of code at the top will catch those errors. Basically what this is doing is setting up some code that will double check all my subsequent calls to make sure I'm doing the right thing. It'll try to find the file. If it can't find it, it'll warn me that it couldn't find the file, so that we don't get surprised later when we go to install this on our devices. In the future, people can just leave this in there when they upload this and build it for their device, because it will turn itself off if it's not on a simulator. Or you could simply comment it out. Either way, it's fine. All right, usually put a little copyright statement at the top of the file. I like to label the file so you know what file you're in, as if you couldn't tell in the editor. Then I go through some stages. I have what's called a pre-initialization stage, which is where I set up any globals that I might need in my libraries. Or maybe I initialize, like in this case, initialize the random seed for the random number generator. And the reason I do this is, if you'll notice here on line 16, I've got a global variable called game font. Well, game font is used in the Super Starter Kit. Super Starter Kit has all kinds of code in it. And among those bits of code, it's got a couple of libraries for making buttons and sliders and all widgety-like stuff, but not using the widget library. And what I did was, as I wanted to make it universally modifiable, in the sense that I wanted to be able to choose my font anytime I needed it. And so I initialize a global called game font to just some font that I've chosen for this project, Adelon Serial. And then when SSK loads the first time, which is on line 22, it will initialize all of those libraries, and they will use game font from then on as the default font for the buttons and whatever other things that I'm using a font for. So the next section is the requires section, and I always require SSK first, and then I will require, in this case, one additional file, which is the game module, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Speeding through here, the next part of this is what I call general initialization. Stuff like I hide the display bar. If I need multi-touch activated, I activate multi-touch. I disable buffering so that when I'm using, when I'm looking at log results on an Android device, it goes directly to the, it gets picked up immediately so I can see the output. If this was set to yes, then this is sort of an advanced topic. The log output would be somewhat delayed occasionally until the buffer filled up and got purged. So what this is saying, as soon as something goes in the buffer, purge it and push it out to the console. So.
And that's important for when there's timing-sensitive troubleshooting?
Yeah, you know, well, what could happen is if you didn't do this, you could print a message, and let's say it's some critical message like missing font or missing file or some setting you needed to see in the console, but you never printed anything after that. It could get stuck in the queue, in the buffer, and you would never see the message. You'd be like, oh, everything looks good. I don't see it in my log. So I don't want that to happen, so I just make sure that it gets purged right away, gets pushed out there right away.
Do you happen to know what kind of performance impact that has, if any?
I would imagine that there's always going to be a performance impact when you do something like this, but it would have to be extremely small. I've never, ever had this turned off in any app or game I've ever used. But I will say that since you're asking a great question, what I do in my apps when I'm getting ready to do a production release, if I feel that it is a good idea not to print anything, I will simply do this. Well, if I can spell. I will replace the print right at the top, at the very beginning. Actually, I'd probably put it right at the very first line in main Lua with a dummy function. And then from then on, the function will get called, but it will do nothing. So I've just basically shut off all printing in my app for the production release, which will save you a ton of buffering and, you know, creating strings and whatever the print function is doing in the background. The bad side effect there is if you find yourself with a release that's malfunctioning and you want to debug it, well, you're probably not going to see anything in the console anymore except for warnings and errors, which won't help you a whole ton. All right, so moving forward here, the other thing that I have in here is a very confusing piece of code. I would encourage you to look at it and examine it. But in a nutshell, this enables two advanced features in certain Android versions. One of the things I really don't like about Android is a lot of Android devices have this bar at the bottom, which has got the back button and the home button in that. Now, some of them are part of the physical device, so they're not in the screen space, but other ones are part of the screen space, so they take up like 40 pixels at the bottom of the screen. So with certain more advanced devices or version 4.4 of Android, you can turn these things off, make them hide themselves and get out of the way so that you get that screen space back. So that's basically what this is doing. It's trying to reclaim the top and bottom of the screen that is taken up by your status bar and your button bar at the bottom. So you get maybe 40 or 80 pixels back in the height of your screen. All right, almost there. So the last little bits here are things to help people out when they're coding. One thing that a lot of people do when they're coding is they make mistakes where they create global variables in their code, they don't realize they're doing it, and it bites them later. Now, I am not against global variables used correctly. In fact, I'm going to show you that we do have some global variables defined by SSK that I use all the time. And I'm going to be using them in this project because it's easier. But at the same time, I try my darndest never to create global variables in my app proper. So after initialization, I pretty much don't use global variables. I will use modules instead to connect bits and pieces, and we're going to cover that in a sec. So I found a nice bit of code out there, and I'm pretty sure if you open up this file, I've commented on where I got it. I can't remember right now, but I think I got it off of the same website where the pill is, the Lua documentation. And basically, if you uncomment these two lines, from then and there, if anywhere within your code you create a global variable, this is what will happen. So let me bring over the simulator. So I reload, nothing. Nothing's being drawn, nothing happens. But then if I go into my code and I say, make a variable, Bob, and assign 10 to it, and then I reload, I'm going to get this runtime pop-up that tells me, hey, buddy, you created a global, and you have locked global. You're not supposed to do that anymore. And it'll tell me that it's on whatever line of whatever file. So line 54 of main, sure enough, there it is. Oh, geez, I meant to do local Bob equals 10. Load that, good to go. Another thing that I hear all the time in the forums, although I really think, I'm just going to tell you folks, shouldn't worry about this. One, hey, turn on the global lock thing, you're going to solve 99% of these problems, which is the leak problem. People are always complaining about saying, oh, I think I got a leak in my game. And I think that comes from the fact that most people don't understand how Lua memory management works. So what looks like a leak is merely Lua doing its job. Lua will accumulate things in memory. It'll allocate some space, it'll make use of that space, the memory usage will grow, and at some magical point determined by Lua, and this progressively changes throughout the app, it will say, hey, it's time for me to do some cleaning, and then that memory will get cleaned up. So memory usage will rise, it'll rise, and you'll think, oh, why does it keep going up and up and up? And then suddenly it will drop. The thing you've got to watch out for is runaway growth. So it rises and rises and it never drops, or it rises and rises and it drops, but it drops to a value that is higher than the previous drop, and that stair steps up and up and up and up and up. So yes, I have a tool out there for this, the super meter. You can find it on my website. But if you don't want to get that, or you feel uncomfortable using it in your projects, whatever, I provide in SSK a much simpler meter, which you can simply turn on using this code. You run it, it'll pop up a little console that will always stay on top of the current content. No matter what you do in your app, this will always show on top, and so you can position it as you wish, turn it off here. The first number is how much memory you're using. The next one is how much texture memory you're using. So just for people as they're going along, if they want to debug their stuff. Okay, so let's get to the sticky bits, the important part. So I told you how the project is organized in terms of layout. I've got images. I've got scripts. I've already got a bunch of scripts in here, but they're all placeholders. I got a sounds file, and under here I've got my music, which is my soundtrack, and then sound effects, SFX, which is little short sounds to go with like hitting the wall, or your player dies, or button clicks, stuff like that. All short sound effects go in here. So those are the assets.
Where did you source the audio?
So yes, first of all, if we back up a little bit and we go into the zigzag boom clone, you're going to find a folder called assets, and under here you're going to find all of the same files, but I will give you the location where I got them. There'll either be a README or a source.txt file, which if we open, it'll show you, oh, this is where I got it. And then I didn't put the license there. I should probably do that, but it's a free, I can't think of the right license name right now. They're free, they're open, and I don't think you have to give them a link or a credit, but I'll double check on that. Sound effects, on the other hand, I'm going to make all of those with BFXer, which is, there's a variety of these tools out there. There's SFXer and BFXer, and I can't remember the other ones, but these are the two major variants. BFXer, as a side comment here, is a very simple, and I say simple, but it's got a ton of options. Let's say it's a straightforward generator, and in fact it comes with preset buttons here for generating certain kinds of sounds. So whoever wrote this said, I know that these settings, when set together, are the appropriate base for making one of these kinds of sounds. So let's say we want to, oh yes, that's what I want to do right now, is update my thing. Never fails. So if I want to make a pickup sound, let me get rid of these. If I want to make a coin pickup sound, I could just click the button. And every time I click it, I get a new random sound. And then if I didn't like that, I could select one of these sounds and I could mutate it. Or I could select, that's a really horrible sound. Okay, stop. Oh yes, that's the one I kept. Okay, that's much better. So we got this doink. I don't quite like it. I can play with each of these settings.
So you don't even have to be an audio file. You can just sort of.
Yeah, you're gonna find. I hesitate to have introduced this so early because people will get into their game development. Here, I'm going to tell you right now. Don't do it. Just make a couple of sounds. Don't make them right. Just make them and put them in your game and keep working. Because otherwise, if you're like
you
me,
could lose hours.
You'll do this for hours. Exactly. And I promise you.
And I use this in my classes. I use this exact same toolkit for my students when they just need a quick sound effect inside their games. This is the tool that I recommend that they go grab real quick. They don't have to worry about any kind of copyright infringement for a sound effect, and that's always a big deal.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful tool that produces basic sounds, which then you can take and you can up the ante with, let me find it. I got too many tools here on my bar. Where is it? I'm looking for Audacity. Where are you?
Looks like it's on the right there. Third one to the right.
There it is. Then you can up the ante. You can load that sound into Audacity, and you can do a more advanced editing to round it out. You can put a little reverb in there. You could. I think these all come out as single channel. I'm not sure, and you may put it for a stereo. You could take one channel in stereo and push it forward a little bit to get a little more interesting. So Audacity is a free tool, which I've already listed in the tools list. It comes in this repository. And BFXer, if it's not in the list, I'll put it in there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. So answering your question the long way, which is pretty much the way I do things. That's where the sounds are coming from.
Very thorough. Yeah, that's good. I like that, and I agree. Don't spend a lot of time because you know.
They're not going to be right the first time anyway.
Right. Exactly. Just need a placeholder.
Yeah. Do the placeholder and then do the polish last. Always polish last.
Same thing can be
Like
said
I
for
said,
graphics, right? I mean,
polish first and don't optimize first. Otherwise, you're never going to get done. Okay. So I wanted to address an important topic. I've lost my code. Where's my code? All right. So, sorry. Get reorganized here. Scripts. The way I'm organizing this project is so that we can get done with it and then shoehorn it in and use Composer to give it a nice framework, splash screen, main menu, and all that stuff. But what we're doing initially is purely working on the gameplay part of the game. We're going to work on the play GUI, the part where you're playing the game. None of the menus, none of that good stuff. And so all of these scripts here are related to gameplay. Now, one of the conundrums, this is really hard. I struggled to find a way to describe this to people, so bear with me. There are basically two ways you can organize your code. What you're going to get when you write any game or app is that you're going to organize your code into modules. That is, if you use modules. And you'll have, for example, a module that is responsible for creating the player character. And you'll have another module that is responsible for making the pathway or the walls in this particular game. Then you may have a module whose responsibility it is for setting up the touch handling. So the one-touch portion of our game and providing you a way to do the input and send that input to the other parts of the game that care about it. And that's the part where it gets really confusing for people who are new to programming or just in general, is how do I organize my project so that the different modules can all talk to each other, but I don't get like circular loops where one module needs to know, like Module A needs to know about Module B, but Module B also needs to know about Module A. Well, you can't require B into A and A into B because Lua won't allow that. So your other way of doing this is using the event system. Lua provides, not Lua, Corona provides an event system which allows us to create our own custom events and custom event listeners. Now we use events all the time, but people don't think much beyond touch events and collision events and stuff like that. But there's a whole series of events that you can create on your own. I'm going to step back for just a second here. I said that I'm loading SSK, and I said last week, with SSK, we're going to use a couple things out of here. One of the things we're going to use is the global variables that come with SSK. I have a whole bunch of global variables that get set up right away. And I know people are going to be shouting at me about this, but I'm just going to do it anyways. I've got shorthand notations for the width of the screen, the height of the screen, center of the screen, both X and Y. I also have shorthand notations for full width and full height, which is if you set your game up and you're using what is it called?
Composer?
No.
Director?
No, in config.lua. If you are using Letterbox. Letterbox is going to try to retain the aspect ratio of your game. So if your game was designed to 320 by 480, but the device doesn't have that aspect ratio, it's going to scale it in such a way that it still retains that, but there would be portions of your screen which are unused. They're extra. Like, for example, this game would fit on an iPhone 5, but there would be extra pixels at the top and the bottom of the screen because the iPhone 5 has an aspect ratio equivalent to 320 by 5 something. I can't remember the number. I always use small ones. I use the original iPhone 4 resolutions as my game design. The point is that when you're using Letterbox, there could be bits and portions of your screen that are unused because they're not part of your game design resolution. Your screen is taller or wider than it expects, and it doesn't know what to do with it. So I have some variables where I calculate the true width of the screen, the true height of the screen, And I also, these are really critical, I pre-calculate the left side, the top side, the bottom, and the right side of the screen so I can position things relative to the edges, not relative to my design space, which may be different from the final device. The point of this is that you're going to see me using variables like W and center X and center Y all throughout the design, and they came from SSK. I defined them once. They're globals. I know people don't like globals. It's like people think globals are evil, but in this case, globals are necessary. There's certain uses for globals, and I find this is one of them.
Can I ask you? You mentioned this a couple of times.
Yeah.
What is the primary difference, or why did you choose to do the globals that way as opposed to having a separate module, or you know?
Right. So
Yep.
the way you're encouraged, and Rob wrote an article about this. He encouraged people to use a module.
Mm-hmm.
The way he said to do it was to create a file, and I'll show you what the file looks like. So if we just pretend that this is the beginning of our file, he would do local m equals da 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 da, and then he'd do m dot w equals, let's say, equals 320, and m dot h equals whatever 480. Return m. Okay, so this is the contents of the module file. Somewhere else, he would type, assuming that m is the name of the file. You know, I could call it. Let's say I called it globals. Was the name of the file, and the content of globals was this little bit here. Then he would local m equals require. The first time this runs, this bit of code would execute. It would create a table. It would assign these two values. And it would return the table. Every other time in every other file after that, if this same bit of code was executed and we required it again, it would simply return m, because modules are initialized once, the first time they're loaded, and kept in memory forever unless you unload them. Okay, so now what we have is m in our local space. So I could say m.w for the width, or if I had I could create center X. Say center X is 160 pixels. I could say new circle. I'm sorry, display dot can't type. New circle. And center X, you know, yada yada yada, more things. Oh, I'm sorry. See, there I'm already doing it. M.center X. Okay, so the reason I don't use modules is because I am super lazy. I know that I have a limited set of globals. I always use the same ones. I know that I will never create conflicting functions or variables that override them, and I don't want to go through the trouble of requiring this and then using the longer m dot something something name, or you know, if I'm somebody who's a little bit more, the word starts with a but I won't say it, you know, I could call it like glob or something. Those are my globals. Then I gotta type glob, and I just hate it. Personally, I hate it. Now, this is why people will yell at me. They'll say, Ed, you're just being lazy. You're telling people to do the wrong thing. The lesson here is know what you're doing, know why you're doing it, make a decision, and stick to it. People will tell you you're wrong, but as long as you know what you're doing and you're careful, it's fine.
So if we took the module approach, we'd have to require it in every file that we wanted to use it in. But with
you'd have to require it every time you used it.
But with the other method, it's just globally available everywhere.
Yeah, and the thing is, I found is I used to do the module method, but then I would find myself in these strange situations where my module needed to know about some contents from another module. So I had this cross conflict where they both needed to know about each other. But then I knew that I was initializing them both first before I used them, and so I said, heck with this. I'm just going to go ahead and make these globals. And so I did.
So once you crossed over into that territory, you just found yourself saying, well, whatever, I'm already there.
Yeah, it was a decision that I made, and I'm sticking with it. So,
Globals do get a really
yeah.
bad rap. We're taught in computer science classes to never use globals, avoid them at all cost. But after a few years of programming, there are just simply times when a global fits the bill, and it makes your life easier as a developer.
You know what I tell people? I say, hey, if you weren't supposed to use globals,
They
they
wouldn't
wouldn't be such
exist. Yes.
they tell new programmers not to use them because new programmers will then use them for everything,
Yes.
and that's when you get in trouble.
Right.
I see it all the time when I help people in the forums. They've done something with a global, they didn't realize it, and that's why they got shot in the foot.
Right.
Okay,
Cool.
so more globals. Unfortunately, I'm going to create some more globals, but these are good ones. In addition to the global variables provided by SSK, there are also some functions that I provide. Now, I was talking about the ability to create custom events. So I do it all the time in my code. So what I do is I create an event, I create a listener for it, and then I throw the event or post the event. Now the proper functions for these, I'll show you the longhand way first. I could make type function. You should have done this ahead of time. Sorry. Now, I could call this function here anything, but I happen to be calling it onBob. So what I've done here is I've created a function called onBob. And then I've said runtime add event listener. I said listen for this event, and when this event occurs, execute this function. Then later I could do this. So runtime dispatch, create a table in here, name the event onBob, and then I could pass some parameters along. I could say age equals 25. So when this bit of code executes, hopefully if I did this right, let me bring it up.
You missed an equal sign for name.
Yep, this is what I do. Thank you. All right. I got too much stuff going on here. All right, there it is. I ran this code. It set it up, set up the listener, and when this bit of code ran, it printed out 25. And I can make this a little more clear. I could say Bob's age is. Bring the log over, rerun it. Bob's age is 25. Let me explain what we're seeing here. What Corona does is allows us to create custom events using the runtime event listener system. And then subsequently, anywhere in our code, we can dispatch that event, which means to produce the event, provide it some data, and all of the event listeners that are out there listening for that event will catch it and do something with it. So what you've got is this beautiful way of creating a listener in one piece of code and then sending it a message from some other piece of code. So you remember how I said you get into this conundrum where you've got modules that need to talk to each other, but maybe one module needs to know about the other module. So you got A and B, and they both need to be able to talk to each other. How do you achieve it? You can't include the modules within each other because Lua doesn't allow module A to include module B if module B then includes module A via the require statement. What you get is in this infinite loop. It doesn't know what to do with it. So what you do is instead you set up event listeners. Now, I use these things all the time, and as I said, I'm a lazy programmer, So I really don't like typing runtime. I always forget if it's capital R or lowercase r. I don't know what the problem is with my remembering these things. Runtime, add event listener, yada, yada, yada. And then you have to make this table. It's just like, it seems like too much work to me. So what I do instead is I've produced 3 functions. Listen, ignore, post. Listen is the equivalent of add event listener. And it's got the same usage on Bob, on Bob. So that's straightforward. Post is the same as dispatch, but it's got a different signature. Post, name of the event, which seems much more straightforward to me. And then if I want to optionally pass arguments along, I can pass this bit as my second part of the function call, pass it a table. Internally, my code over here will take these two and combine them and produce this. So it's just shorthand, lazy person notation. So if we do this, and I run it again, Bob's age is 25. Same result, shorter code.
I like to do the same thing in Linux/Unix environments. You know, I like to create shortcuts for very terse commands. You know, where you're just like, I got to do all this stuff, and I got to do it repetitively, and I only want to be able to remember one short command to do it.
Exactly. I'm a lazy typist, so I like nice short command names, or as you noticed, nice short variable names. W for width, H for height, full W for full width, etc., etc. I know that Sergey may be watching this someday, and he'll go, Ed, I can't believe that you did not make those so that people will know what those mean. You should have said width. Sorry, buddy. Mr. Lazy over here. Okay.
Well, and we run into this problem all the time as developers and programmers. Once you've got 4 or 5 programming languages under your belt, they start colliding. And so having these tools in place that are similar between languages that we always use these methodologies just makes life a lot easier.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Right. The listen, ignore, post. Your dog agrees. The listen, ignore, post. I don't remember what language they came from, but I used these somewhere else, and so now this is how I think of them. I don't think of it as dispatching an event. I think of it as posting an event. So therefore, post. All right. So I know that this has been a rather circuitous discussion. So the key points that we've covered here: organization of the files, very few in the root directory, folders that contain images, scripts, sounds, and the SSK library. Main.lua, although it looks kind of long, is mostly comments, and it contains very little. It basically requires, I say includes, I'm a C guy, so I say include when I mean to say require. It requires SSK. It requires the game module, which is, and I didn't say this yet, the game module for our game is the master of all creation. It's the one that is in charge of talking to all the other modules, creating the player, creating the path, using the other modules to do the work. And I'm going to jump there in just a moment. Some initialization stuff that I would say, you know what, just skip right over this. If you're new, don't even care. Just use it directly. Worry about what it means later. Some debug stuff that we might turn on at a future date. And then we get down to the guts of this. And this is all our game does to start up. First, I call the init function in game, and it does initialization stuff. We're not going to cover that today. And then the next thing I'll do is start the game. So set it up and start it. And that's all there is to it. I do want to, I've modified my files here. I do apologize. I do want to talk a little bit about game, honestly. If I can find it. You know what? I think we'll leave that discussion for later. So, because I got to do the demo of transitions, at least demo it. Shoot.
Well, if you want to, we can leave the transition for next time, and then we can pick up with game.
We better, because I really need to close this point. So I wanted to make a point about the 2 different ways of calling things. So right here, I've required game, which is a module, and if we look at game,
it's there on your left-hand side. tab on the left hand.
Already got it?
Yep.
Oh, there it is. So if we look at game, what I do is I create a table at the top. That's my module container in a sense. I'm going to attach all my variables and functions that the module needs to expose to the world are going to be attached to this. Then I require some other modules in here because remember I said game is the master of all creation. It knows about all the other modules. So the one-touch module, the player module, the sound module, the wall creation module, etc., etc. Then I do some setup. Oh, we don't need this because these are part of our globals. I set up some local variables. I localize some things. Localization, for people who don't remember, is basically what I do is I make a local reference to a global function or a function in another library, and I store that reference in a local variable so that when I use it, when I call mrand instead of typing mathrandom, it's faster. So you will see that I typically will localize some of the same things in all of my files because I use these functions so much that I know that I'm going to need to localize it at some time, so I just do it initially. And whether I use it or not, it will always be localized in this file.
And you're saying faster, that's not just faster to type, but faster to execute.
Faster to type and faster to execute. Significantly faster to execute. For example, one thing that everybody forgets to do is localize pairs. And then they use pairs a bunch, and pairs is a very expensive function, especially when you're dereferencing it every time you call it. Okay, so then we've got init. All the modules pretty much have an init function. Some of them will have a start function, a stop, and all of them will have a cleanup function. Although I almost never use my cleanup functions because I pretty much start the game and then the game never ends. Nonetheless, we may talk about this later. So let's talk about how game talks to the sound file, because sound demonstrates both ways of using modules. So as I said here in main, I require game. Game returns this table which I created. Attached to that table is the function init, which I then call line 67 of main. It then executes all of this code, starts up physics, creates some rendering layers, initializes some of the other modules, and then it talks to the sound module. And what it does is it initializes the sound module, and if we go look at sound.lua, which is in the scripts file, we'll see that the sound module loads the requires audio. It sets up a table called sound. It creates another table called effects. Then it uses my shorthand notation to set up an event listener for an event called onSFX. I'll come back to it in a minute. It has the init function. The init function will fill in some sound effects. If you recall from our sound effects folder, we had click and explosion. It uses the audio load sound function to load that sound into memory, get it ready for using. This function itself will return a handle, a variable in a sense that we can use later to reference that sound. I store it in my effects table. And the only other function is left in this is the play soundtrack, which we won't talk about today. Actually, I'm going to have to. Okay, so we go back to game. At this point, it's been initialized. I'll comment out the start. And we'll see what we get in the console when this executes. I know, you're probably looking at the clock. We're getting ready to run over.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so when you can't see anything happening on the screen, but I will press Control-R, which is reload for the Windows simulator. We'll see some stuff print out here. What we'll see is it says initializing game module. That's this line right here. A little bit further down, it's going to create some layers. We'll see that it prints out creating render layers, which if we were to go open the layers module, we would see that the creation code prints that out. and then it initializes one touch, player, and wall, and they all have similar statements in them. So we see initializing one touch, initializing player, and initializing wall. The sound file doesn't have any output. It doesn't print anything out to the console, so we don't see a message from this one. But at this point, sound is ready to use. So let's go ahead and re-enable over in main.lua the start. So that's this function in the game module. See that I have a bunch of stuff commented out here. So I'm going to uncomment the first one. Now, when this runs, it's going to come in here, can ignore the first couple of lines. It's going to call the function play soundtrack out of the sound module. If we go look at that, we'll see that this is the function. What it does is it loads at that very moment, it loads the soundtrack file, whatever it may be, that we pass to it. Get these side by side so you can see them, which is unique track something something. That's so technical. It loads it up, as I said before. We get a handle, and then uses the audio play function to play that sound. Plays it on channel 1. It says to loop it infinitely because our soundtrack will pretty much just play in the background forever and ever. And when it first starts, it will take 3 seconds to fade in. So this is a direct call to the module. We're basically required the module into a game, and we are directly calling in to do something with it. So let's go ahead and run the code and see, make sure I saved everything. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this.
No. It's not coming through on this end.
Okay. So
but I'm assuming
it's
soundtrack.
hard to show audio in a video. Okay. Darn it. That's terrible. Okay, well, people run this, do what I'm doing here, go into the game module, and then this next step. And what this one's going to do is it's going to create a loop where it's going to call timer perform with delay. It's going to have a 1 second delay plus 100 times the loop counter. So at 1,100, 1,200, etc., it's going to call this function here. I know this is kind of advanced, but we've talked about this stuff before. This is a closure. Then it's going to call my post function. So long story short, what I'm doing is I'm posting 5 calls to the on sound effects, on SFX listener. And if you could hear it, when I reload here, you'd hear a delay, nothing, and then you'd hear click, 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 click. And then at 2 seconds, you'd hear the explosion sound.
I think it's much better this way.
Or you could hear me make the sound effects.
I heard the sound effect that time.
Yeah.
In the background.
If you uncomment that code, Ed will come over to your house and make noises.
That's okay. We've got a recording of that. That's now going in my next game.
So what I've demonstrated here, and we will come back and recover this because it is a little bit confusing at first. What I've demonstrated is how to call functions directly from a module and how to set up a global event listener, which then anywhere I wanted to write this line of code, it would execute, and the bit of code over here listening for that sound effects code would hear it, it would see the event, and it would do the right thing. It would play the sound effects that I've specified. I just want to close with, why do I do this? 2 reasons. 1, there are always cases where 2 modules need to talk to each other, but there's no good direct way to do it. So your way of handling that is by using events. 2, I like to keep my code as separated as possible, because if you'll recall, I said earlier, I like to repurpose my code. One bit of code that you could take from this example and repurpose right away would be sound.lua. This is a standalone audio module at this point. You could drop this in any project where you are using SSK, and it would immediately function as long as you had the sound files there. You could just execute it, load sound.lua once, it would initialize, and then you could post your sound effects, and it would play, and then you'd be done. It's very simple to implement.
It seems like this would be definitely a good way to minimize the amount of noise in your game logic.
No pun intended.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, because then you can just look at like how things are flowing as opposed to all the code that goes into making it work. Which, you know, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen there wasn't like a ton of code, right?
It's extremely, yeah. It's very tight code.
Yeah.
One line of code to produce a sound effect. I don't have to require the file in that where I'm using it. All I have to do is just post the event. Or for people who insist on using the runtime event, dispatch the event. So they're 2 bits of code that live somewhere else from each other. They're completely ignorant of each other, and yet they're connected through the event system.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. So here's let me kind of give the audience homework. Mm-hmm. So we're modeling all this off of Zigzag Boom, which is an existing game, which at this point you should go and download. I think it's iOS or Android, right? Isn't it on both platforms?
And it's free.
So there's really no, yeah, and it's free. So there's no excuse not to go look at the app. Get a good sense of what it is, how it works, what the things that you notice are, and all that kind of stuff like that. And then go back and watch Hangout 129, where Ed breaks down the app itself, the different components, you know, the different mechanics, and then go download Ed's code and do exactly what he's doing here, which is step through the code and understand how everything is structured, not only just from the folder structures and the files that are included and stuff like that, but also things like the module, like the sound module and stuff like that, how those things are being used.
Then, if you really want to understand this, and I'm speaking from someone who has been teaching programming for 20 years now, do it yourself. Type the code in, write it yourself. Don't just simply read through Ed's code. Ed's code is fantastic. You're going to learn a ton reading through it, but there's something that creates a learning connection by going ahead and writing that code yourself.
Yeah, a very good point. So that's your homework. Go do that. And then next week we will come back and we will look at code, right? For putting,
yeah.
We'll start laying down.
I'm sorry, I just heard the word homework and I got shivers.
Okay.
On that point, Brian's point is right. Next week we're going to do some real concrete code. We're going to focus on making the walls next week. We may be able to accomplish more, but our primary focus next week will be understanding how you create just one section of walls. Not even the continuous one, because it's a big discussion, but just the initial set. How do I draw walls? Just a few.
Okay, good. And then we will also take a look at transition library easing and that sort of thing.
Right. That will leave some time for actually talking about easing.
But hopefully everybody understands that as we go through here, we're going to be breaking it, like you just said, we're going to do walls, and then we'll come back the next week and we'll do something else, and then it'll be all pieces of the conversation that you can put together, and just as Brian said, if you want to follow along with with the code that's provided, that's great. But yeah, definitely sit down and work with it yourself. I saw several things that you were doing right off the bat that would be great to do. To take it apart and play with on your own. So, and everything is available. I mean, everything that you've provided in SSK is, I mean, it's not like it's completely foreign to the Corona documentation, right? Everything that's in SSK probably comes from some sort of either Lua or Corona or whatever. So it's all document. Go spend some time in the documentation for Corona as well. If there's something that you don't understand that's in the SSK, it's probably documented over in Corona docs anyway. So, is that right? Is there anything else?
Nope.
Yeah, I want to know what happened to your giant beard. I feel like I invested so much time in watching the beard grow, and now it's gone. What happened?
I almost turned that into like an event, just so that everybody could be involved in the shaving of the beard, but But if you follow me on Facebook, you saw my daughter shaved off half of it, and my son shaved off the other half, and we just, it was time for the spring cut. So it was fun. I always told Ed it was my face was involved in the project, and I really had nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
so it said it was time. It was time to.
You got tired of harassment.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I got it from all sides. Actually, that's what made it go on for so long. If nobody had said anything, I probably would have shaved it in like a week. But everybody kept saying stuff, so I was like, I just kept growing it, see how much reaction I could get.
See how much I can get from people. I see.
That's it, right? Exactly. So thanks to everybody who followed along with that, and this is our primary method of operation for a while. So
it's much better.
I think so. I like it.
Change is good anyway. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. I swing. Sometimes I'll get in a mood where I think I want long hair, and then that promptly goes away.
Okay, don't do the 50 style thing now. I don't want to see that.
Hey, there for a little while. I had, for a couple of days, I took the beard off, and then I just had long hair, and then I had like one of those little page boy caps, so I looked like Simon and/or Garfunkel, whichever one was the one that had the cap.
Simon and/or Garfunkel.
I don't remember which one's which.
That's right. Keep some cat in the bag, but okay.
That's right. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here, and we'll be back here next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific to talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. Until then, have a great week and happy coding.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.